the luxurious mansion of millionaire Charles Davenport, everyone expected a perfect evening. But when the renowned pianist canceled at the last minute, the host exploded in fury before his guests. That was when a 12-year-old boy, the janitor's son, stepped forward and said, "I can play, sir." The hall erupted in laughter. Even Charles mocked him. But when the boy placed his fingers on the keys, something happened. The laughter died down, phones were raised, and no one would ever forget what came next. The iron gates of Charles Davenport's mansion opened slowly, revealing the immense house illuminated by torches and chandeliers visible even from the garden. Luxury cars lined up at the entrance, while uniformed drivers escorted guests dressed in glittering clothes. Amid all that opulence, a modest car parked discreetly near the side gate. Out stepped Angela Brown, 35, her uniform neatly pressed, and beside her, her 12-year-old son Malik, dressed simply but clean, his eyes full of curiosity and unease. The mother held his hand firmly, knowing his presence might be frowned upon, yet unable to leave him home alone. She took deep breaths with each step, thinking of overdue bills and the burden of keeping dignity alive for her son. Malik, on the other hand, looked at this new world as if it were a movie scene, an unreachable universe that somehow called to him. Angela walked with steady steps, accustomed to the weight of judgment in places that were not her own. Some older staff glanced at her, some with sympathy, others with disdain, as if her decision to bring her son was far too bold. Malik, stepping into the grand hall, stood speechless at the sheer magnitude of the space. Crystal chandeliers scattering golden reflections, and at the center, a massive grand piano sat like a silent jewel. His eyes lit up the moment they found the instrument, as if all the grandeur around him had vanished. Angela noticed, squeezing his hand gently, reminding him to remain discreet. But the boy was already captured by the fascination. Every black and white key seemed to whisper his name, promising something he himself could not explain. Charles Davenport moved across the hall like a king among subjects, his voice dripping with sarcasm and self-assurance. He laughed loudly at his own jokes, surrounded by flatterers sipping champagne without once glancing at the servers. His eyes never stopped on Angela or Malik. To him, they were invisible, part of the machinery meant to keep his perfect night intact. Malik, however, could not look away from the piano. That silent passion was already steering him toward a collision with destiny. The boy did not know it, but the gleam in his eyes had not gone unnoticed. A watchful guest had seen the intensity of his gaze. To Malik, the piano was not just an instrument. It was a chance to prove his life could have a voice of its own. The clash between invisibility and longing was beginning to weave the thread of the night. The main hall of Charles Davenport's mansion looked more like a gallery of power than a place for a celebration. Paintings by renowned artists covered the walls, not out of love for art, but as symbols of status. Persian rugs muffled the steps of guests who mingled in select groups, laughing at sophisticated jokes or whispering about new investments. At the center of it all, Charles reigned with the confidence of a man who believed the world lay in his hands. He raised his imported champagne flute with rehearsed gestures, every movement staged to impress. Around him, sycophants applauded even his silences, as if his very breath were worthy of reverence. From a distance, Malik observed him with curious eyes, unable to understand how someone could seem so powerful and yet so devoid of warmth. Charles moved among the guests like an invisible conductor, controlling the social melody without ever lifting a baton. With a cold smile, he spoke of knowing how to choose the right company, and how true power is never shown, only felt. Each phrase was followed by nervous laughter, as if the guests competed to prove who admired him most. Angela, circulating discreetly with a tray of glasses, listened to those sharp words from afar, her heart heavy. To her, there was no music in his speech, only the noise of arrogance. Malik, however, remained entranced by the grand piano at the center of the hall. To him, the real spectacle was not Charles with his golden flute of champagne, but that silent instrument begging to be played. With each passing minute, the desire to approach it grew stronger. A call he would not be able to ignore much longer. Meanwhile, Charles highlighted the evening's star attraction, the world-class pianist he had hired especially for the event. A true master, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, the music will be worthy of my house, he announced, drawing applause from his adoring audience. He spoke of the musician as though he were an expensive decoration, not an artist with a soul. Guests prepared themselves for a flawless performance, and Charles basked in the reflected glory. Angela steadied her breath, adjusting her uniform, determined to end the night without drawing attention. Malik, however, could no longer restrain the fire in his eyes. The piano stood there, so close yet untouchable, and his heart beat as though it already heard a secret melody. He could not imagine that opportunity would appear in the most unexpected way, and when it did, it would change the course of the evening forever. The wall clock had just passed 9 when one of Charles Davenport's assistants hurried over, clutching his phone as if holding a ticking bomb. The host raised an eyebrow impatiently, certain it was nothing more than a trivial issue. On the other end, the news dropped like a stone into still water. The renowned pianist, the grand attraction of the evening, would not be coming. A serious personal emergency kept him away. Charles felt the blood pounding in his temples. The carefully rehearsed smile froze on his face, turning into a hardened mask. The silence that followed was enough for those nearby to sense the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The king of the hall had lost control, even if only for an instant. He ended the call with a sharp slam, the sound louder than the background music. Then he raised his voice for all to hear. "Unacceptable! How dare anyone cancel on me?" His arrogant tone reverberated through the gilded walls. Some guests chuckled nervously, thinking it a dramatic exaggeration, but quickly realized he meant every word. Charles began pacing, ranting about incompetence, threatening to cut contracts, making it clear he tolerated no failure within his circle. Angela Brown, quietly arranging glasses at a side table, watched in silence, feeling the air grow heavier with each word. Malik, at her side, saw not only a tantrum of rage but also a dangerous opening, a chance that brought him closer to the piano. The hall, once filled with laughter and shallow conversation, sank into discomfort. No one knew how to act before the host's fury. Some tried to change the subject, others slipped away discreetly, fearing they might become the next target of his wrath. Charles raised his champagne flute again, still fuming. A party of this magnitude without live music? It would be a disgrace. His need for perfection and power was under threat, gnawing at his vanity. Malik, however, could no longer hold back. His eyes locked on the gleaming piano, and something inside him ignited. Without waiting for permission, his heart pounded as though destiny itself were pushing him forward. This was the moment that would change everything, and somehow, he knew he could not let it slip away. The uncomfortable silence lingered in the air when Malik Brown stepped forward, his eyes locked on the grand piano as if it were an irresistible magnet. His breathing quickened, his heart pounded like a drum in his chest, but his voice came out steady, surprising even himself. "I can play, sir." The words rang clear, echoing through the hall like an unexpected note amid chaos. Guests exchanged glances, some surprised, others already ready to laugh. Angela Brown, startled, tried to hold her son's arm, but he stood firm, determined not to back down. Charles Davenport stopped abruptly, turning to the boy with disbelief written across his face. For a moment, the entire hall held its breath, waiting for the unfolding of an improvised spectacle. Malik never looked away, and in his eyes was something no one expected to find: courage. Charles let out a loud laugh, dripping with sarcasm, quickly infecting part of the crowd. "You?" he scoffed, striding toward the boy theatrically. "A ragged boy, the janitor's son, thinks he can replace an international pianist?" His words were arrows, sharpened to wound, and they struck Angela straight in the heart, her cheeks burning with shame. Malik, however, did not retreat. His small frame seemed insignificant against the grandeur of the hall, yet the firmness in his eyes told another story. Some guests laughed openly. Others raised their phones discreetly, ready to capture what they believed would be a memorable fiasco. Angela whispered desperately to her son, "Please, don't do this." But Malik only clenched his fists tighter, as if this were the only chance he would ever have to prove who he really was. Still laughing, Charles stepped back and spread his arms as if granting a favor. "Very well then, young prodigy. Show us all what you can do. Let's have some fun." The grand piano gleamed brighter under the lights, awaiting Malik. The boy walked toward it with short, steady steps, each sound of his shoes on the marble floor echoing like a war drum. The entire hall followed him, split between mockery and curiosity. Angela trailed behind, distressed, silently begging he wouldn't hurt himself further with such boldness. Malik sat on the bench, his hand gliding across the polished wood, feeling the weight of responsibility. The hall was suspended, everyone ready to laugh at the first mistake. But deep down, something in that instant already hinted this would not be a childish attempt. It would be the beginning of something unforgettable. Malik Brown took a deep breath, his fingers hovering above the keys as though afraid to touch something sacred. The hall leaned forward, eager for the inevitable collapse. The first note came timid, trembling, nearly drowned out by suppressed laughter. Charles Davenport crossed his arms, satisfied, certain embarrassment was moments away. But suddenly, as if a switch had flipped inside him, the sound transformed. Small hands glided with precision, shaping a melody delicate yet strong, filling every corner of the hall with unexpected emotion. Laughter died in the guests' throats, replaced by looks of astonishment. Malik did not look at anyone, only at the piano, as if speaking to it in secret. Every key seemed to know his story. Every chord revealed hidden memories. Angela watched closely, her heart racing. She remembered the hours Malik would spend on the old church keyboard, even after long days when she came home exhausted from work. The out-of-tune sounds often echoed through their tiny house, but the light in her son's eyes always outshone any missed note. She knew talent lived in him, but she never imagined this night, among so much wealth and contempt, would be the stage where the world would see it too. Guests glanced at one another, some wide-eyed, others struggling to conceal their emotion. Malik wasn't just playing music. He was playing something beyond control, something no fortune could ever buy. A tear slid down Angela's cheek unnoticed, for everyone was already spellbound. Charles, however, shifted uncomfortably in his place. The plan to turn the boy into a joke unraveled note by note. The music swelled, intense, carrying a force almost too mature for 12-year-old hands. The millionaire bit his lip, battling the strange feeling of losing control of his own party. Malik, meanwhile, was consumed, shaping the melody with assurance, as though he had lived this stage in countless dreams. The entire hall was hushed, commanded now by a boy who minutes earlier had been invisible. And with every passing second, the weight of truth descended. No one would ever forget those first sequences of notes. It was only the beginning, and already impossible to look away. The first notes had shocked them, but now Malik Brown's music completely dominated the atmosphere. The hall, once alive with chatter and laughter, sank into reverent silence. Glasses froze in midair, waiters stopped in their tracks. Even candle shadows seemed to sway in rhythm. The melody grew stronger, cutting through the hearts of the guests, as if each chord unveiled an untold story. Angela Brown, standing nearby, remembered the countless nights her son practiced in secret on the old donated keyboard from the church. Malik had played until the keys gave out, insisting on turning broken notes into living music. Now, on the gleaming grand piano of the mansion, there were no broken notes. Each sound was pure, each pause intentional. The 12-year-old boy seemed transformed, and no one dared interrupt. Among the guests, some began to exchange looks of awe. A man who prided himself as a patron of the arts squinted, trying to decipher the source of such skill. A refined woman brought a hand to her chest, feeling the notes echo deeper than any gala speech. Angela saw every reaction with a mix of pride and fear. Pride for her son's gift, fear of what would happen once the music stopped and the millionaire's judgment returned. Yet she could not look away. Malik wasn't just playing the piano. He was translating emotions into a universal language, breaking social barriers with every measure. The music swelled, and mocking laughter became nothing more than a distant memory. Charles Davenport, however, squirmed in discomfort. What was supposed to be a joke had become the centerpiece of the evening, and not by his design. The mansion's owner watched his power slipping away to a boy armed with nothing but talent and courage. He tried to spark a new conversation, but no one listened. A bead of sweat ran down his temple, betraying his unease. The millionaire realized, though he would never admit it, that he was losing control of his own narrative. Meanwhile, Malik improvised effortlessly, blending classical technique with his own style, as if born for that stage. The entire hall remained spellbound, and it was clear nothing would ever be the same. With each pressed key, Malik wasn't only playing music, he was dismantling Charles's pride in silence. Charles Davenport drew deep breaths, trying to mask the turmoil boiling inside. The hall, which had always orbited around his presence, now belonged to a 12-year-old boy at the piano. With every note, Malik Brown pulled gazes away from the host and bound them to his melody. Charles, accustomed to being the center of all attention, felt displaced, almost invisible. He attempted a loud remark, forcing a laugh, but no one responded. The piano's sound drowned his voice like a river swallowing stones. He gripped his glass tightly, as if he could crush the situation in his hand. Angela Brown, watching from afar, noticed every detail of his discomfort and knew the longer Malik played, the more Davenport's vanity would crumble. The boy, oblivious to the turmoil inside the millionaire, remained fully immersed in the music. Now he shifted with confidence, moving between recognizable classics and vibrant improvisations. Guests exchanged silent glances, some even with tears in their eyes. An elegant woman whispered, "This is no ordinary talent. This is a gift." Angela felt her chest swell with pride, but also with fear, for she knew Charles could not bear to share the spotlight at his own party. Malik seemed to drift into another reality. His hands danced across the keys, his closed eyes revealing a heart guided by emotion. Every chord told an invisible story, a narrative that held everyone captive without asking permission. And the more the music grew, the clearer it became that the true master of the evening was not the mansion's owner. Charles could no longer endure the silence of indifference. He clapped his hands twice, trying to reclaim the focus, and said loudly, "Well then, A fine bit of children's entertainment for such a serious evening, isn't it? He expected complicit laughter, but found only serious stares that did not respond. The piano continued, steady, ignoring his attempt to interrupt. It was as if Malik had become untouchable, shielded by something greater than Charles's arrogance. The host felt a stab of anger mingled with fear. For the first time in a long while, he could not control the direction of an event in his own home. Deep down, he knew this music would not end merely in applause. It would end in change, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The final chord echoed through the hall like a restrained thunderclap, vibrating against the marble walls and even making the chandeliers tremble faintly. Malik Brown held his fingers over the keys for a few seconds, letting silence complete the piece. His eyes opened slowly, and only then did he realize the entire hall was on its feet, applauding with enthusiasm. The sound of clapping was deafening, a perfect contrast to the scornful laughter that had greeted him minutes earlier. Some guests shouted "Bravo," while others stomped their feet, transforming the room into an improvised celebration. Angela Brown, tears in her eyes, could hardly believe what she was seeing. Her son, the invisible boy of the party, was now the center of all admiration. Charles Davenport, standing in the back, swallowed hard, his throat tightening at the sight of a scene he never imagined. Malik rose shyly from the bench, almost embarrassed by the magnitude of the reaction. He hadn't expected so much, hadn't sought so much. He only wanted to show he could play. Yet the applause was genuine, born from the emotion he had awakened in every heart present. An elegant lady dabbed her tears discreetly with a silk handkerchief. A young businessman, impressed, was already talking about study opportunities for the boy. Angela watched it all with pride, but kept her dignity, refusing to be swept away by the euphoria. She knew behind those cheers there were also watchful eyes, ready to twist any detail. Malik, still unsure how to respond, gave a simple bow he had learned in church choirs. The gesture drew even more applause, heightening Charles's discomfort as he watched his authority crumble before his own guests. Charles tried to recover, forcing a wide smile. He strode to the piano and placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, as if to claim the boy's triumph for himself. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," he boomed theatrically, "even at my parties, unexpected talents arise. What a memorable night!" Some nodded politely, but others exchanged skeptical glances, seeing through his attempt at manipulation. One bold guest raised his voice. "With all due respect, Mr. Davenport, it was this boy who saved your evening, not your checkbook." The comment echoed like a veiled accusation, stirring murmurs and leaving Charles's smile frozen in place. Malik lowered his eyes, not fully understanding, but Angela felt the weight of those words. For the first time, someone had publicly challenged Charles's dominance in his own home, and that spark was about to ignite a fire. The hall still vibrated with applause when Angela Brown drew a deep breath and chose to remain composed. She did not rush to Malik, did not raise her voice, did not boast. She simply stood tall, dignity etched in her posture. Her heart overflowed with pride, but she knew any exaggerated gesture could be turned against them. She approached her son only when the murmur died down, leaning in gently and whispering, "Talent demands respect, not charity." Malik nodded, still breathless, his eyes shining with emotion. Charles Davenport, just a few steps away, watched that quiet exchange with something between irritation and envy. The applause had not been for him, nor for his party, but for a boy with nothing but courage and music. And that corroded his vanity more than any criticism. Among the guests, excited whispers spread. An elegant woman, known for sponsoring young talents, discreetly approached Angela. "Your son has a rare gift," she said, handing her a golden card. "I want to see him perform at the Music Foundation this month." Angela accepted it with trembling hands, surprised by the speed of it all. Malik, at her side, looked up silently, as if seeking permission to dream bigger. Charles watched from a distance, and every word from the woman struck him like a nail hammered into his pride. He had never imagined that, at his party, anyone would dare shine brighter than him. His discomfort only grew, along with a desperate need to regain control of the situation. Angela, however, did not let excitement blind her instincts. She knew such an invitation carried opportunity, but also risk. She slipped the card into her pocket, staying calm. Malik smiled at her, and she answered with a firm look that said, "We'll be cautious." Around them, guests continued murmuring, some praising, others already discussing the video they had recorded of the boys' performance. Yes, phones had captured everything, and those images were already beginning to spread beyond the mansion walls. Charles realized too late that he had not only lost control of the night, but of the narrative itself. And Angela, with the serenity of someone who had endured years of imposed silence, knew this was only the beginning, and not even a millionaire could silence the music within Malik. The party gradually dispersed, but Charles Davenport could not accept that his evening had been stolen by a 12-year-old boy. As the last guests began to leave, he called Angela Brown aside, dragging Malik with her like a troublesome chess piece. His voice was low but carried threat. "What happened here stays between us." He pulled out a checkbook and scribbled a large sum, shoving the paper toward Angela. "This should be enough to remind you of the place where you belong." Her hand remained still, refusing to touch the check. Malik glanced curiously, not fully understanding, but his mother's steady gaze said everything. Dignity had no price. Charles narrowed his eyes, surprised by the audacity of her silence. He was used to seeing everyone bend to money. Angela drew a deep breath and replied, her voice calm yet firm, "My son doesn't need charity, Mr. Davenport. He only needs opportunities." She folded the paper carefully and handed it back, as if returning something worthless. Malik, standing beside her, felt his chest swell with pride for his mother, realizing in that moment that courage was not only in playing the piano, but in words that refused to bow. Charles, humiliated, shoved the check away, trying to mask his anger. "You don't understand how the world works," he muttered, spinning on his heels. Angela did not answer. She knew it wasn't worth arguing with a man who confused power with respect. The empty hall seemed to echo Charles's invisible defeat, while Malik gripped his mother's hand tightly. What Charles did not realize was that, while he tried to buy silence, the truth was already slipping through every crack. Videos recorded by the guests circulated in private groups and on social media, spreading like wildfire. The boy in simple clothes, the maid's son, was now being called the prodigy of the night in circles far beyond the party. Angela, still unaware of the scale, walked out of the mansion with Malik, her steps calm yet firm, carrying more than memories. She carried the certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Charles remained in the empty hall, fists clenched, unable to imagine that the storm approaching could not be contained, not even with all his money. And when the news exploded into the world, it would be him, not Malik, who would have to answer for it. The next morning, Charles Davenport awoke to dozens of missed calls and a flood of messages from his advisors. The video of Malik Brown playing piano at his party had spread like gunpowder, reaching thousands of views within hours. Online newspapers splashed provocative headlines. "The Maid's son who silenced Chicago's elite." The story was gaining momentum, accompanied by comments praising the boy's talent and condemning the host's arrogance. Charles, used to controlling narratives, now found himself captive to a story that wasn't his. With every missed call, the pressure mounted. Sponsors demanded immediate responses, partners questioned his offensive behavior, and even politicians who once courted him now distanced themselves, afraid his tarnished image would stain their alliances. For the first time in years, Charles felt cornered, like a king whose throne was beginning to crumble. While the Davenport name became the target of memes and criticism on social media, Angela Brown carried on with the serenity of someone who had learned to survive in silence. She cleaned houses as usual, avoiding talk of the night before, while Malik practiced on the old church keyboard, completely unaware of the storm swirling around his name. Yet even in silence, Angela knew the storm would soon knock at her door. A neighbor brought a newspaper with Malik's photo at the grand piano, applauded by a standing crowd. The image was powerful, almost symbolic. A boy representing all the invisible ones, celebrated in the mansion of an arrogant millionaire. Angela's heart swelled with pride, but also with worry. Her son's talent was a blessing, but visibility could be a cruel trap. Excited, Malik asked if he could play in more places. She answered firmly, "You must be ready for whatever comes, my son." Meanwhile, pressure on Charles grew like an unstoppable tide. In an emergency meeting with his top advisors, he heard the verdict: either you make a public apology, or you'll lose important contracts within days. Charles scoffed, irritated, unwilling to accept the idea of apologizing to someone he considered beneath him. His pride fought against logic, but the numbers spoke louder. Sponsors suspending funding, clients demanding statements, and rumors of investors preparing to walk away. His heart raced as if he were standing at the edge of an abyss. For the first time, he understood he could not simply buy silence or erase the truth. If he wanted to preserve the empire he had so carefully built, he would have to step onto the stage not as a host, but as a defendant before public opinion. And on that stage, it would not be wealth that spoke loudest, but the courage to face his own humanity. News of Malik Brown's talent spread so quickly that, within days, a Chicago Cultural Foundation announced a special event to formally present the boy. The auditorium filled to capacity, not only with music lovers but also with journalists and the curious, eager to witness the new sensation. Seats were scarce, and even influential people who had been at Charles Davenport's party showed up, this time not to flatter the millionaire, but to see the boy who had captured hearts. Charles received a formal invitation to attend, but he knew his presence was more an obligation than a privilege. His image was damaged, and everyone awaited his public response. Angela Brown, nervous, straightened Malik's simple tie, reminding him that every note must come from the heart, not from pressure. He smiled confidently, his innocent eyes still unaware of the historic weight of that night. When the audience settled, the lights dimmed, and Malik's name was announced with enthusiasm. The boy walked to the piano to warm applause, but before he could play, the organizers called Charles to the stage. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and camera flashes intensified. Charles climbed the steps slowly, as if each one were a heavy stone chained to his feet. He wore a flawless suit, but his expression revealed the clash between pride and duty. The audience didn't just want music. They wanted to see the millionaire confront his own arrogance. Angela watched from the front row, her heart racing, aware this was the decisive moment. Malik, seated at the piano, looked at the millionaire with calm serenity, as if fear had no place in him. And it was precisely that calmness that seemed to dismantle Charles's walls. At the microphone, Charles drew a deep breath before speaking. He tried to smile, but the gesture came out forced, drawing even more distrustful looks. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight is special not only because of the music we will hear, but because of a talent that was born before my very eyes. His voice echoed through the hall, but lacked the old confidence. Some applauded, others stayed silent, waiting for something real. Charles knew he couldn't stop there. Angela's steady gaze and Malik's quiet determination were mirrors reflecting back his soul. For the first time, it wasn't a contract, a deal, or a party at stake, but his reputation and his humanity. And as he hesitated before the crowd, he realized that only the full truth could salvage what remained of him. The microphone trembled slightly in Charles Davenport's hands, betraying the internal conflict he tried to hide beneath a mask of confidence. All his life, he had been applauded for rehearsed speeches, each word carefully crafted to preserve power and status. But that night, the masks no longer fit. He began with memorized lines, trying to bend the narrative in his favor. He spoke of valuing talent and how greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places. The words fell flat, and part of the audience remained unmoved, waiting for sincerity. Angela Brown, in the front row, watched him with unblinking eyes, as if refusing to accept anything less than the truth. Malik, his fingers resting lightly on the keys, fixed his calm gaze on the millionaire, a gaze that intimidated more than any open criticism. Charles swallowed hard, cold sweat running down his neck. He remembered that night in his mansion, the mocking laughter he had encouraged, Angela's wounded eyes, and Malik's unshakable courage. The audience waited, and the silence grew unbearable. In that moment, something inside him gave way. He dropped the rehearsed speech and, with a voice thick with emotion, admitted, "That night, I was wrong. I laughed at a boy's dream. I humiliated his mother in front of everyone. And yet, it was they who taught me the meaning of true greatness." The confession echoed through the auditorium, breaking the barrier between arrogance and vulnerability. Some guests widened their eyes, others began timid applause, and the tension lifted like fog. For the first time, Charles spoke not as a host but as a man. Angela felt a lump in her throat, surprised by his sincerity. She had not expected to hear those words in front of so many. Malik, however, smiled faintly, as if he had always known this moment would come. Charles continued, "Tonight, I am not here to be applauded, but to recognize that this boy has a gift the world must hear, and that his mother represents the silent strength that sustains that gift." The audience, moved, responded with stronger applause, this time genuine. The millionaire lowered his head, accepting that this was not his stage. It was Malik's. And the boy, inspired by the newfound courage of the man who once mocked him, was ready to prove he needed no speeches to show his worth. Only music. And that music, he knew, would speak louder than any words spoken that night. The auditorium was still applauding when Charles Davenport raised his hand, asking for silence. His eyes scanned the audience, but soon fixed on Angela Brown and Malik, as if they were the only ones there. "Tonight an apology is not enough," he said, his voice stronger now. "Tonight I want to turn this mistake into a commitment." A murmur swept across the seats, and the journalists' cameras all rose at once. Charles drew a deep breath and announced, "From this night on, I am creating a music scholarship in the name of Angela Brown. And it will be the start of a program to ensure that young talents like Malik have access to teachers, instruments, and opportunities they were never given." The audience erupted in applause. Angela covered her face with her hands, stunned, unable to believe what she was hearing. Malik, eyes shining, turned to his mother and smiled, as if he already knew their struggle had left a permanent mark. Charles continued, his voice gaining conviction as he spoke. "If greatness can be born where it is least expected, then our duty is to give it space to flourish. Malik, you did not just save my evening. You taught me the true value of music. It does not belong to classes. It does not belong to fortunes. It belongs to those who have the courage to live it. Each word drew louder applause. It was clear the audience was not just hearing a speech. They were witnessing a rare change in a man unaccustomed to yielding. Angela's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, she saw justice not as charity, but as genuine recognition. Malik looked at Charles with renewed respect, without forgetting the humiliation, but recognizing that something genuine was being born. The stage, once a symbol of arrogance, had become a space of reparation. But amid the whirlwind of emotions, Malik raised his hand and asked to speak. The gesture surprised everyone, including Charles, who hesitated but then handed the boy the microphone. Malik drew a deep breath, looked at the packed audience, and then at his mother. His voice came out clear and firm. "I accept to study, I accept to play, but on one condition. I want my mother always in the front row, and I want everyone, from this day on, to respect the work of those who clean this place. Because without her, I wouldn't be here." The audience, moved, rose to their feet in thunderous applause, some crying openly. Angela covered her mouth with her hands, unable to believe those words had come from her son. Charles, overcome with emotion, realized the lesson was not yet over. The true power of that night was not in money, nor in the Davenport name, but in the firm voice of a boy who knew exactly what he wanted. The auditorium stayed silent for a few seconds after Malik Brown's words, as if everyone needed time to process the weight of that condition. A 12-year-old boy, standing before Chicago's elite, had dismantled speeches, reversed roles, and placed truth at the center of the stage. Angela Brown, in the front row, felt her legs trembling. She had never imagined hearing her son demand, with such clarity, the respect she had longed for in silence all her life. Charles Davenport, standing beside him, breathed deeply, his expression torn between pride and discomfort. The microphone was still in Malik's hands, and every word he had spoken echoed like a hammer shattering the invisible walls of inequality. The audience, stunned, seemed incapable of returning to indifference. Angela discreetly wiped away her tears, but could not hide her proud smile. Her son, who had grown up playing on the broken keys of an old keyboard, was now dictating terms to men and women used to commanding everything. Malik had not asked for fame nor money. He had asked for respect. Simple but revolutionary. Charles, still uneasy, understood at that moment that it was not enough to create a scholarship in Angela's name to make amends. He would have to honor the boy's condition, and under so many watchful eyes, there was no room to retreat. Applause began timidly, but soon swelled, echoing through the entire hall. Malik calmly handed back the microphone, and in doing so seemed larger than the stage itself. The audience no longer saw just a musical prodigy, but a boy who understood the weight of dignity. Charles took back the microphone with trembling hands. For a moment, he hesitated, as if his pride wanted to resist one last time. But then he raised his voice. "It's decided. Angela will always be in the front row, and this house, my house, will respect everyone who works within it. That is the promise I make today, before all of you." The reaction was immediate. A standing ovation, tears running down faces that, only minutes earlier, had worn masks of indifference. Angela covered her face, overcome with emotion, while Malik ran to embrace her, drawing even stronger tears from the crowd. Charles watched the scene, realizing that something inside him had shifted irreversibly. For the first time, he was not the master of the spectacle. He was simply part of a story much greater than himself. And by accepting the condition of a boy, he had also accepted the chance to rewrite his own life. That night became unforgettable for all who were present. It was not only the story of a gifted boy, but of a world that, even for a moment, was forced to see the invisible. Malik Brown, at just 12 years old, had turned an elite stage into a witness of the power of his music and the dignity of his mother. Angela Brown, deeply moved, finally felt seen, not as the maid so many ignored, but as the root that sustained that talent. And Charles Davenport, for the first time in a long while, did not see himself as the man who owned everything, but as someone who had learned to respect what no amount of money could buy. The cameras captured not just the sound, but also the tears, the smiles, and the silent lesson that lingered in the air. In the days that followed, newspapers and TV programs echoed the event as a turning point. Malik received invitations to perform at music schools, concerts, and even international events. But in every interview, he made sure to mention his mother's name and repeat his condition. "My mother in the front row always." Angela, with her calm, steady voice, reminded everyone that the greatest triumph was not fame, but the respect they had earned. Charles, for his part, turned his promise into reality. He created the Angela Brown Scholarship, which soon opened doors for dozens of young people who would never otherwise have access to such opportunities. Slowly, his public image shifted, no longer remembered only as the arrogant millionaire, but also as the man who had been unexpectedly changed. One morning, Malik returned to the old church keyboard, the same one where he had first learned to dream. He played a few simple notes and smiled at Angela, who watched him with quiet pride. "Does it still sound good?" he asked. "It sounds the same as it always did," she replied. Like truth, Charles, who had come to visit that day, remained silent, sensing there was still much he could learn from this family. The boy he had once tried to ridicule had taught him more than any contract or investment ever could. Malik would continue down his path in music, Angela would remain his fortress, and Charles would carry forever the reminder that true wealth is not measured in figures, but in the courage to change. The echo of that night would never fade. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you won't miss any new videos, and of course, leave your like. It really helps the channel keep bringing you moving stories like this one. Thank you so much for your support.